Now, doing this video was always going to be an interesting one for me because Dalrymple Hamilton is one of those people who turns up a lot. He is a part player in so many important events of World War II. But he's also one of those who we know the least about. Let me give you an example. If I was talking about Admiral Somerville today, if I was talking about Cunningham, Vian, anyone like that, I can point to at least one book about them. In case of Vian, it's his autobiography. Hamilton, Darren Hamilton, no autobiography. No. There are reasons for this. One of them, I would argue, is probably because he's quite so connected to the royal family. And as a habit, people who are connected and in that circle do not like to leave autobiographies. It can cause issues with how people might portray events later on. So they tend to not. And when we say how connected he was with the royal family, well, his son was the godson of Edward the Eighth. Yeah, Edward the Eighth, the king. It's kind of useful. Admittedly, he's the king who decides to abdicate, but he was still king. And the goddaughter, well, his daughter was goddaughter of the Queen Mother. And they have a lot of other royal connections as well going on. So, especially for people connected to royalty at that time, they don't tend to leave behind autobiographies. Okay. So where are the sections I can go hunting for? Well, there's Ludovic Kennedy's work, Sinking of Bismarck, which I've talked about many times before. That's a very good book. There's HMS Rodney by Ian Ballantyne. Excellent work. There's Killing the Bismarck by Ian Ballantyne. Let me put it this way. He produced a book 2 years later, which was... How'd I put this? It uses sections from lots of his other books, but puts them together, adds in some new information, and it's a really interesting read. But if you had read HMS Rodney, there are sections in there where you're going... Well, speaking as someone who knows Ian, going... I love you. You're a great friend. You're the editor of Warships International Fleet Review, a wonderful magazine that really helps people learn about what naval things are going on in the world at this time. But this is sailing slow coast the edge of copying and pasting. It really isn't. It's not quite there, but it is close. And there's a few other works as well, but not many major books about him. And not many major summaries. There are some obituaries, which are always nice to read. But again, there's not much there. So Dalrymple Hamilton is a good example of a leader to talk about. But he's also a good example of someone who it's quite interesting to go and research. Okay, for him there is some bits, but there isn't a lot. For researching leaders who we don't have anything done by before, that's a lot of primary research to try and do, to try and track down. And honestly, if they're not written about at the time, if there aren't contemporary accounts from other autobiographies, other works, etc. going on, it's often quite difficult to piece together parts of their picture. So, for example, Dalrymple Hamilton. These are a couple of the pictures available that you can find on him. Sir Frederick Hugh George Dalrymple Hamilton, according to his official naval service record, he's born in London. But many other sources record him as being born in Bargany, Ayrshire, Scotland. You cannot be born in two places. You have to only be born in one. That's the little geographical fact. Unless you were shoved back in, and I just don't want to think about that as a possibility, okay? So, born one place, but we're not quite sure where. And this man is born not that, early in our history. It's 1890. We would normally presume by 1890, especially a member of a family quite as prominent as Dalrymple Hamilton comes from, we would expect to be fairly certain about where they're born, normally. This is normally an issue I find with people from the 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th centuries. Once you're going, the further you go back, the more and more you're unsure about their exact date of birth. You usually know when they died, because usually it involves people shooting, a lot of people shooting at each other, and a lot of other people dying at the same time. But finding out when people are born, usually pretty difficult. In this case, we're not quite sure when he's born. We do know when he died, but he didn't die with the usual fire, and he died in Bargany again, in Ayrshire. So that is where his family comes from. There's a whole debate. Again, some sources claim he's born in Scotland, in Bargany, some say London. The naval record says London, so I would normally presume London. His family had accommodations in both, but it could have been Ayrshire. And he's born on the 27th of March, 1890, which is why we're doing it today, because it's his birthday. It's his birthday, and so it seemed appropriate. Well, I'm recording at least this bit on his birthday. The live will definitely be happening on his birthday. But I always do both. He learnt his trade in destroyers, and he is very much a destroyer man. These are the sorts of vessels he piles into from an early age, and when I say from an early age, I really mean from an early age. He seems to manage to get into destroyers disturbingly early. He basically goes through his training, and within minutes, within absolute minutes, he is into the destroyers. And this, of course, is minutes by Royal Navy career timing. But if I want to give you an example of where you have your next piece of fun in trying to find this person's career and try and track this person's career out, which is why the historians who specialise in doing autobiographies, I absolutely venerate beyond belief. I have to spend enough time myself with the careful written script that you find in these documents. These are just free, and you can download these free, by the way, for free from the UK National Archives if you go to the website and you're hunting for Dalrymple Hamilton. And yeah, they're great. Believe it or not, the one we're interested in, and the one I spent the most time trying to figure out, is this one, which is ADM 196/52/243. Which, when you start going down the ship list, it goes Britannia, Hindustan. Okay, that makes sense. They're both training ships. And then it starts to pop around. And he likes to go for small cruisers or try to get destroyers. He's always trying to get back into the smaller ships. He seems to very much want to be in the smaller ships. And he managed to get them. And then he starts getting command. And the notes coming out of it are beautiful. They're brilliant. They are astounding. But my lord, are they hard to read. I actually have it sitting next to me so I can read from it on script. And it's at 250% magnification on the digital screen so I can assess it properly. Because anything less than that and it just isn't showing it up properly. It just isn't giving me the right frame for me to point to. What I love is these records also include things like discrete, various parts about the Navy and what's been going on, various articles. You read through it and you go, okay, so what have you been up to? What have you been doing? Why have you suddenly got this person's position in that role, and why have you got Lieutenant Commander Higgins' notes in here in Dalrymple Hamilton? Why did that come up? And you start connecting through, and it does provide you with beautiful stories and history to go into. But mostly, what you find when you read through this is that there is these one-line summaries of their careers and how they operate, and it just keeps kind of cheerful, good keeper of order, excellent captain material, possibly a bit aggressive. I am inferring the possibly a bit aggressive from the phrases which come in and the next one's describing destroyers. But considering we are talking about a man who gets a reputation for driving his destroyers so fast he bashes into things, and still gets promoted, he's both very good and someone's not too bothered that he manages to not, let's say, write off 2 destroyers, but ding them badly enough that they're out of service for a couple of months. And what do? They literally just go, oh, don't worry, we have another destroyer over there which is free. Go command that. And this service builds up to his World War I experience, because his World War I experience is literally, he has 8 commands of 6 destroyers between January 1917 and May 1918. So there are a couple of destroyers he ends up having bifurcated commands. You can guess from my earlier statement how he ends up having a bifurcated command of them. But they just go, oh, don't worry, go take command of that ship in the meantime. Don't worry, it's fine. It's fine. We'll keep you out there fighting. This is another factor which it comes into the whole story we're going to get into later, his time on HMS Rodney, because you have to understand, this is a captain, this is a commanding officer who has had a reputation from the moment he has been a lieutenant in command of vessels, of pushing their engines as hard, as fast as he possibly can. He holds the speed records in pretty much every class he's in. Again, this is not something I can 100% confirm because the races were informal, i.e. not encouraged by the Admiralty, but from the other sources and the way officers have talked about him and their descriptions of him, when he's in them, he's considered the one who gets the most speed out of his ship. Phrases come out like, unsurprisingly, Dalrymple Hamilton's command was at the front. Unsurprisingly, Dalrymple Hamilton's command had stolen a couple of knots on us. Unsurprisingly, Dalrymple Hamilton's command has managed to race through to the enemy first. He is fundamentally an archetypal destroyer officer of the Royal Navy this period. Thank God they don't have Formula 1 racing in this period, because the Royal Navy would have lost an officer, and then Formula 1 would have lost a driver who would have complained that they weren't driving fast enough for him. His concept is always to push the speed. Push the speed. And he's given good destroyers to do it. Sometimes he's given old destroyers. Sometimes he's given new destroyers. He doesn't really care what he's given. He will work those engines. He has a very good relationship with his engineering officers, possibly bribing them with copious amounts of scotch. I'm not sure, but between him and the engineering officers and his petty officers, who he does a lot of work with because he likes good petty officers on his ships, he seems to get speed from those hulls. Now, again, there are, I've always said, there's always the official stats for what you can do with a ship's engine. The official stats of what publicly acknowledged. No one expects the navies, by this point I hope watching enough of my videos, to be telling the full and complete truth about what their speeds are. They're telling you it can do this speed in all weathers, under all conditions, or this is the speed which this is the best speed they can do under peacetime conditions. With the peacetime not mentioned. When we are not prepared to blow out an engine, when we are not prepared to risk boiler damage, when we're not prepared to risk anything really, because we need to carefully husband these resources for wartime. But the moment war gets in, you're prepared to do different things. And the speeds, therefore, can change, because you're prepared for a greater boiler wear. You're prepared for having to replace the turbines sooner. You're prepared for all these issues because, frankly, in wartime, the speed matters more than than necessarily the life of the boilers and the engines in terms of the operations you're doing. You can factor those things in if you need to, but speed is going to matter. Giving this kind of officer HMS Rodney would seem diametrically opposed to what his entire raison d'etre is. Honestly, coming from a destroyer background, being as obsessed with speed, having always commanded destroyers, to go off and command Dartmouth and then be given HMS Rodney would seem rather strange. Unless, of course, you want to make your slowest battleships to be going as fast as they possibly can, or rather, your slowest primary combat units. Because let's be honest, the R class are about the same, but they are second line battleships. They're for doing convoy protection. They're for doing bombardment. That's what they're going to support with. But the Nelson and Rodney, they're supposed to be frontline combatants at the front line. You want them going as fast as you can. This is the kind of officer you go and pick at that point. The kind of officer for whom those safety measures and those standards you put in all your books and you've diligently been training officers with for years in peacetime to husband resources, has always considered them to be guidelines, advice, maybe, a little bit mothering in the nicest possible way. That, let the children experience the full range of potential, risks. You don't need to, don't need to wrap me in cotton wool sort of scenario. And as I've mentioned already, he does get up to things in these destroyer commands during World War I. And he only gets command in 1917. He's been in the Royal Navy for 12 years. He joins the Navy in 1905. He joins the same year HMS Dreadnought is laid down. And in 12 years, he's merrily wrecking destroyers for them. And I mean, he's merrily wrecking destroyers for them. He collided with a trawler when in command of Druid, probably from going too fast. And he damaged the propellers of HMS Murray. Again, from possibly going too fast in water. He wasn't supposed to be going at that speed because, of course, when you're going at high enough speed, the bow rises up in the water, but also the stern goes down, which makes the propellers go down a bit further, and they can hit things. Especially with these destroyers. Let's be honest, earlier destroyers are not like the multi-thousand-ton beasts we see today. These are a few hundred tons. What they would do with them is insane. It truly is insane. And this is not a small vessel of low importance. HMS Murray is a M class. Druid was an Acheron class. He was in charge of her till March 1918. So, yeah. And in May 1918, he literally, Murray gets damaged. It's just, it's a bit of history. It's something which we wouldn't expect in many regards of these officers, in terms to think of them as racing around at high speed, damaging stuff, but that's what he was doing. But that was the war. That was the war, and he worked himself so hard through the war that at the end of World War I, he's admitted to Queen's Ferry Hospital for influenza. He's admitted for influenza. He's that ill. And, by the way, I would like to say that to the very nice person who wrote this, has written a lovely phrase on the Dreadnought project, which was so beautiful. It said, his service record is difficult to read. Because again, as I admitted, this is not something I do for every officer I encounter. It's not something I specialise in. And this is why I really do respect Spartan people, officers people who do go and specialise in reading through this stuff. I thought initially when I was reading through his records, because that was the first thing I went and did, to search the National Archives for his record, I thought it was just me. And then I went hunting his photos, and I went to the Dreadnought Project, and I went, oh, it wasn't just me. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That is so kind. It wasn't just me. Again, it's a worthwhile place to go and read through and look at and find out, because there's things like twice HMS Gary, he's in command of her, and this is from January 1917 to January 1917. Something happens. He then goes off, commands HMS Thorn, then HMS Lark, and then he's back to Gary in March 1917. Commands until June 1917. And by the way, when you look at Gary, as far as it's concerned, he's its captain in that period. There's no one replaces him, because Gary has to go off and get some work done. And that also happens, by the way, with HMS Murray, which is why he goes and commands Munster. And there is a debate as to whether the propeller issue happened in May or April 1918, because the thing is, in April 1918 is when he ceases to be in charge of Murray, and he's back in charge of her in the 3rd of May. And he's the only commander of her, so she wasn't in service during that period, so I think it probably was in April. That would fit more with the service record, but the results say she's damaged in May. But that might be it might be that she returned to service in May, and someone writing up the stuff in Model 1 didn't put necessarily in the correct date in the right slot. We love to think that, humans wouldn't make these mistakes in such an important time, but they do. They really do. But it's fun. And then his post-war service, after he's recovered from an influenza. More destroyers! The man has a type. The man really does have a type. And it's suitable for him. It is a suitable type for him. It really is. Not quite sure what Gwendolyn Peake, his wife, was like when he married in 1918. But I can't imagine she was exactly a slow mover to be able to keep up with him. To be able to manage him and 3 children, one of whom his son, I've already mentioned, North, the godson of Edward VIII. Also, North goes off and serves in the Royal Navy and is actually serving aboard at King George V when his father is commanding Rodney, and they are both beating up Bismarck. Yes, it was a family affair in the Royal Navy. I would love to say they're the only father-son relationship going on in the Royal Navy fleet in that formation, but they're not. There are a few others. But that's not really a case at this point, because his son isn't born until 1922. Not born until 1922. I'd also add, his wife and he both died in 1974. I think his wife went first, and he died in December 1974. So it does seem to be very much a happy marriage. And they seem to have been very happy together. But that was all in the future in this point. His post-war service was going to be more destroyers, and finding actual pictures of his destroyers are pretty difficult. I have a theory of that. I have a theory that most of the destroyers, by the time they're looking at photographs and going, hang on, that one's been dinged to blazes, not taking a photo of that. That's going to be a terrible example of design. Look at how scratched up it is. How fast was that captain going? I don't know, but I do know the military police haven't managed to track him down yet. He's still getting a reputation as a speed demon, and he is training already the next generation of junior officers, next generation of destroyer commanders. When you think he's commanded all those vessels and he hasn't even made lieutenant commander, that's some experience he's had. He's been in the Royal Navy 14 years when he's made a lieutenant commander. He has had 9 commands of 7 destroyers already. Think about that level of experience. Think about what he's learnt in charge. And yes, he served as a junior officer of all those destroyers, a second officer for most of World War One. You're dealing with someone who is a stone-cold destroyer specialist. I will refer you to an earlier statement I have made on many videos. The Royal Navy in World War II is not being run by the battleship mafia, despite what many interesting books claim. When you actually look at the officers, they're all the destroyer mafia. They come from the destroyer force, and there's a reason for this. They're selected for aggression and intelligence. They have to be capable of being many different roles in a ship and understanding many different roles in a ship, because there aren't enough officers aboard these ships for the officers to be picky. So they get a lot of experience, and they get a lot of command experience early on. Think about this. How many lieutenants in the cruiser force, or the battleship line, will have commanded any ships and actually been in their command of ships before they even make lieutenant commander? Before they've even seen 14 years of service? Not many. With that list of ships? And think about it again from this perspective. He keeps bashing up ships, but the Royal Navy just keeps giving him more ships. And that, to me, tells me more than anything in those documents, as badly written and difficult to read as they are, could ever tell me, even if they're perfectly written. Because that means that senior officers have endless chances to get rid of him if they want to. Endless chances, and they keep putting him back. That tells me how good they think he is. That tells me how good they think he is. And he does get an interesting set of destroyers. He gets HMS Violent, a V-class destroyer. I could only find her sister Vimera. August 1922 to December 1922. That's that one, I think. He gets Sturgeon is represented by Thistle here. I think, yeah, that's Thistle. That's F82. She also represents Spencer, because they're both. No, she represents Thistle is the R class, and then Keppel here as also represents Spencer, is a Thornycroft type flotilla leader, a larger destroyer, because the Royal Navy keeps moving towards building larger destroyers. Because they want to do more of them. They want to spend more time on them at sea. They want them to do more work. And that means, for all their other issues, that means they need bigger ships. One of the interesting things I often have to confront when I'm talking about procurement and I'm talking about defense spending is that often the growth in size of equipment reflects more our desire to do more with that equipment than just wanting it to be bigger. One of the reasons why I have the suspicion that gun sizes are going to grow soon is because for many years the 5-inch etc. has been enough when you were just concentrating on missiles. Now missiles have reached the point, and we are looking at conflicts which may involve the expenditure of far more munitions than we had been planning on for the previous 40 odd years of what's going on in the world. Suddenly, guns are starting to come back into attraction, and as you want to do more with guns, you're going to want more bigger shells, because you can do more with a bigger shell. You can make it more programmed, you can include more components, you can include more things like rockets, etc. And other stuff to assist it and in its range and its targeting. You can make it into a smart shell far easier. And that's going to affect things. Well, it's the same with destroyers. You can, almost looking at these pictures, you can see, despite the pictures having no scale and not being, the growth in these vessels. The change in them. The difference in what's expected of them. And difference in what's expected of their commanders. And Dalrymple Hamilton is at the front of this. He's at the very front of this. And then he makes captain. Now, one of the things you might have noticed already is that, well, he gets promoted to captain in December 1931, and he gets HMS Malcolm in February 1932. But prior to that, he hasn't had a ship since May 1925, so 7 years when he hasn't been in command of anything. Well, he's been serving on various other roles. And when I say various other roles, I mean serving in various other roles. If you go to read that lovely document, you'll see things like Victoria and Albert showing up, and Victory, etc. And, well, that's the Royal Yachts. The Royal, this is Victoria and Albert. And then Victory, etc. These are staff appointments. He's doing staff duties. Staff posts. In between that, he's also attending various schools and training programs to get his qualifications up. Perfectly normal for an officer in his position. Again, this is the year of leadership, so we're focusing on his leadership capabilities. But yeah, suddenly he gets HMS Malcolm. And he gets this command because that's the flagship for the Nor Reserve Flotilla. So he's given HMS Malcolm. There's a picture up here as HMS Montrose, because I can't find a picture of it. And he's basically in charge of her to prepare her for war, to keep her ready for war, and to keep her and the rest of the Nor Reserve Flotilla ready for war. These are important ships. These are important destroyers. The Royal Navy doesn't need 250 destroyers in peacetime. They really don't. But they need them in wartime. They need more than that in wartime. So, yes, they keep them in reserve. And they have a corps officers who are administering them, but they also have reservists who assign them, and they'll mobilize them for training every now and again. And one of the things that I find really quite cool is coming behind him in that role is Captain George Creswell. Now, why is Captain George Creswell showing up there quite so interestingly? Because he is the first captain of a tribal class flotilla. And when I looked through these officers, you have people like William Whitworth, you have Kenneth McPherson, you have all sorts of officers have held this role. And you start to realise that, again, for the destroyers, this is another very good role for them to have for their destroyer officers. It gives them more positions to have captains destroyers in it. So they can have many more than they have active flotillas, because they have the reserve flotillas. And it's also a role which combines a strong staff element, which allows the officer to gain experience running a staff, running a team ashore, working with a dockyard. And you'll notice that for his experience, because later on, one of the commands he gets will be the Malta dockyards. Superintendent of Malta dockyards. And if you're going to look for his relevant experience, it's, well, he's been made a captain and he was in charge of the Nor Reserve Flotilla. And that was interfacing a lot with the yards and facilities to support that. It was a critical role. But then he gets 4th Flotilla. He gets HMS Keith. He gets 4th Flotilla, and he gets them for... well, he gets them for a little while. Roughly 2.5 years. Good times. Good times indeed. And with them, he deals with a lot of issues which the Royal Navy had in this time. He is once again adapting to the situations, but in 1930s, they at a 4th Flotilla are at the forefront of operations in the Mediterranean. They're dealing with the Abyssinian crisis, the Spanish Civil War, or rather, well, the Abyssinian crisis actually happens while he's in command. The Spanish Civil War technically starts in July 1936, but these things all have tensions going on before them. They're dealing with the ongoing fallout of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire post-World War I and the issues that's created in the world, the various mandates. These destroyers are being incredibly active and incredibly important for those duties. And what's more is he's getting these destroyers, they are pretty much some of the newest destroyers the Royal Navy has available. None of the B class, including Keith herself, were commissioned later than 1931. In fact, they were all commissioned during 1931. Between February and April 1931, to be precise. 9 ships. Keith, of course, is the destroyer leader, which is why she has a slightly different name. The rest of the B class were Basilic, Beagle, Blanche, Boadicea, Boreas, Brazen, and Brilliant and Bulldog. They are good vessels for 1930s. They really are. And their interwar service was at high speed. Again, high speed. This is something which comes about a lot in the life of Dalrymple Hamilton. He's getting speed now not only out of his own ship, but out of the ships with him. When there are various comments from his rear admiral destroyers at the time. One, Andrew Cunningham, Hamilton's flotilla, the 4th Flotilla, could always be relied on to be the first if you needed something to be the first at any event. If you needed something there at speed, if you needed someone who was getting the best out of their crews when it came to gunnery, manoeuvring at speed, maneuvering at speed, you called the 4th Flotilla. In fact, they had such a good name that when they had deactivated in 1936, they're brought back when the Treble class destroyers are set up. Originally, you have the 1st and 2nd Treble class destroyer flotillas. And then they decided, well, hang on now, these are, whilst they're special, they're still destroyer flotillas, so we better call them destroyer flotillas. And the 2nd Treble flotilla, the flotilla in the Mediterranean, is renamed the 4th Flotilla. Because the 4th Flotilla by that time had a reputation of always being first into the fight. And it owed itself to that, partially due to its previous experience, but also due to the very firm reputation established between October 1933 and March 1936 by Dalrymple Hamilton and the speed with which he moved his vessels around. I can honestly say that when he handed over command, they must have been quite sad to see him go. Speaking of which, you have to consider what he'd worked on while he was out there. You know, the specific maneuver which he was really involved in the testing out of in the Mediterranean was the box maneuver. Now, the box maneuver is famously carried out by Philip Vian with the 4th Flotilla, which is actually the 2nd Tribal Destroyer Flotilla, which was the Mediterranean Tribal Flotilla, but was renamed the 4th Flotilla because of various reasons, and that's a whole thing covered in my book, Troubles, Battles and Darings. But the thing is, they practice this maneuver. The maneuver is to use their speed to get in around a fast-moving enemy capital ship or service freighter. If you've got 4 or more destroyers, you block in at their points, and you will keep attacking individually through the night to keep them occupied. You can do it in daytime, you can do it in nighttime, but the whole point is you're not enabling them to concentrate their fire on any one ship, because if they concentrate their fire on one, then there are 3 others which are being left as free agents, and that's not something you want to do with destroyers. At no point in a world where there are destroyers with those torpedoes which are designed to sink ships, and who are really desirous of getting close to sink ships with their torpedoes, do you want to leave it as, oh, yes, we are ignoring 3 of you to concentrate on 1 of you. So it divides the ship's fire. And the thing is, if you're dividing its fire, you're also dividing its directors. You're meaning that you've got more teams having to concentrate on more targets. Those targets are going to be there for quite a while, that they're going to be wearing them out, and it's going to, especially when you're using visual identification system and visual fire control. And even if you're using radar-assisted fire control, you're still using visual aiming and targeting for much of this period in technology. You are going to be wearing their eyes out, because it's a lot of concentration. And so if you want to burn through a ship's skilled gunners, skilled directors, you want to give them multiple targets hanging out at just the right range, that, they're sort of in secondary range, but they're not really targets you want to engage with your primary weapon system, because do you want to use 11-inch or 15-inch guns to engage a destroyer? You can do, but they'll probably be maneuvering, zigzagging at the very least, and still maintaining speed and position, which means it's going to be very difficult to target them, and that's going to require even more effort, and it's going to wear out your crews even more. It's... how do I put this? It's a method of using destroyers' natural aggression, the aggression that's trained into them, as a legacy of World War I experience, a legacy of the Harwich Force, a legacy of people like Dalrymple Hamilton. But it's managing that aggression in such a way it's going to cause maximum attrition to major enemy targets, should they find themselves out. It's one of the interesting things when you start talking about things like what would happen if a Tribal class destroyers, if the flotilla, actually the 4th flotilla or 2nd Tribal class flotilla, had actually come across the Grass Bay, because there is a point where the Grass Bay is going north, they're coming south, and if timings had worked out differently, they'd have bumped into each other. Well, the odds are they would have formed an 8-pointed square, where the Grass Bay would have had literally 3 destroyers off there, 3 destroyers off there, 1 hanging out front somewhere, and 1 hanging out behind. And he would have probably done that. That would have been how they manoeuvred for their daytime to position themselves in the day. And then at night, that's when they'd be dashing in for the attacks. That's when they'd be coming in hard with the torpedoes. 1 at a time, coming in. So they don't run the risk of torpedoing each other. If they really wanted to be cruel, if they've got 8 rather than 4, what they can do is arrange it so that the tangentially or the opposite ships attack simultaneously. Now, you might think, well, surely the destroyer at the front has the advantage. It can just turn to one side and fire its torpedoes directly back. It can do, but of course, what ships try to do when you've got a spread of torpedoes going in is comb the torpedoes, try and thread through the tracks. And something being fired directly from the front actually makes that almost more easy to do. Which is why you tend to want to fire from slightly ahead and slightly to one side, so you can comb in. So actually, when you're doing the attack maneuver, that's what you're sort of going to do. But you also can do that from the stern side. You can do all sorts of different maneuvers to angle the torpedoes so that they're going to be aimed for slightly ahead of where the ship's going to be. Because the idea is you want to get, if you're firing a salvo of 4, you want to at least achieve 50% hits. You can try and aim for a perfect squad hit, getting all 4. But basically, that's requiring the ship to carry on moving at the same speed. So it can either slow down, it can turn, or it can speed up. That's its options to try and avoid torpedoes coming in. So ideally, what you want to do is aim it so that one would be ahead of where you think it would be, one would be after where you think it should be, and two will be heading for it. And you do this by aiming for the center point to be slightly ahead of where you think it's going to be. It's the fun times with destroyers. And Dalrymple Hamilton is involved in all this. Dalrymple Hamilton is involved in all this testing, all this development going on. And now we get to the Shameless book plug, which I've already sort of started by mentioning Troubles, Battles, and Darings, haven't I? So, Shameless book plug time, when I get to say thank you for supporting the channel, thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, thank you for helping the channel grow, thank you for helping me reach more people. When I get to say, well, when this video comes out, I hopefully have managed to get a 2 Historians video recorded for tomorrow. For the Sunday, for Sunday, to cover while I'm away for brew ships, so that you'll have something fun and interesting. I'm not sure, but you know, we could have done something. I have a couple of ideas of things to organise. Currently, the one I was planning to do this week has cancelled already, so what I can record next week before I go away because I'm recording this, of course, a week in advance. I try and record these videos at least a week in advance, so that when I am away for a few days, there isn't a drop-off in the video production. That works better when I don't have flickering lights above my head, which I now don't. I now have a patchwork quilt of cool white and warm white, which I'm showing my Scottish roots in, Scottish and Cornish roots in, by the fact that I am not changing all to cool white, despite the fact that it would be better from a lighting perspective for the camera, because, well, these warm whites are still working, so, you know, I'm not getting rid of perfectly good bulbs. That would be silly. They're working. But, who knows? Hopefully you're going to enjoy the week that's coming. Hopefully all the videos are up and ready and scheduled to go. It should be a fun time. It should be a fun period of history for us all to watch. And, yeah, thank you very much for supporting the channel. Thank you very much for, again, liking, sharing, and subscribing, for buying my books when they come out. I say books because there is a second one coming. It is coming. I'm going to use the week away, the evenings in the hotel, to make sure I'm happy with the editing and everything's at the position I like in it on my laptop, so hopefully that will all go to plan. That's a good thing about having a hotel space, you know. I might be slightly antisocial. I'll be meeting up some friends, I'm sure, because I'll be back in London. But, yeah, I'll probably be using most of my time in the hotel to tap away on the computer and make sure I'm happy with editing and everything, get everything lined up so I can get it all uploaded to Amazon and get everything sorted out for a Kindle Direct publishing. There are formatting software and various things I need to use to make that look good, but it's going to be a fun thing self-publishing my own book. At this point, I'm hoping to get it out soon. But I'd also like to visit the National Archives and do one more check through the documents from there, because I'm using rather a lot of documents from there before I do it. So that's going to be, maybe I get time to do that while I'm on. Maybe I can schedule an extra day. We'll see. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for being so helpful and making all this possible. You really do make this channel viable. It's a weird thing to say, but it was never my plan to be doing this on YouTube. It was never my plan. My plan was always just to be a uni lecturer and write books. You know, very traditional academic path. But now I'm doing this. I'm still doing some uni lecturing. I'm going to set up a website soon so that people can find me more easily for the various things I need to do, the various things I do. So, because people sometimes leave comments on YouTube on the YouTube channel, I'm just going, that's not really how this is supposed to work. I need a proper website, and that is something else I'm going to get around to doing in April. But yeah, thank you. You make all this special, and it's special, and all this possible, and it's so much fun. Thanks to all of you. Thank you. Anyway, what does he do after 4th Flotilla? Now, at this point in his career,
He gets sent to Dartmouth to be the captain there. Now, I've talked before about the captaincy and being the senior officer at Greenwich, which is the higher academy of the Royal Navy. It's where they go for the advanced learning, where they're going for strategy. That is where they are looking to raise officers from being good ships officers and good junior officers and good destroyer commanders to being strategic officers, to being officers who are capable of doing staff work, who are officers who are able to going on for senior leadership roles. What does Dartmouth do? Dartmouth is about training the future culture of the Navy. So by putting someone like Dalrymple Hamilton in charge of Dartmouth, you have pretty much said right then, we have this officer who goes everywhere as fast as he can, who applies himself with 100% energy, 100% effort, who takes really good care of his crew, who might have bashed up some ships but has always been doing it in the service of completing the mission. Here is the living example we want to give you of what we want you to be like. This is allowing him to basically shape, provide the purpose, the form, the model for these junior officers coming through of what a Royal Navy captain is supposed to be like. He's their living example. He's the one setting their culture for the 3 years leading up to World War II. And you cannot overstate how important this role is. It's basically Royal Navy going, Dalrymple Hamilton, we want our officers to be like you. We want you to shape our culture. And that's what he does for 3 years. For 3 years, he is building the Royal Navy's junior officers. He is training them. He is guiding them through their development. This means that when you've got World War II breaking out, think about it. He's been in charge of junior officer training for 3 years. There are very, very few junior officers in the Royal Navy at this point who have not been trained by Dalrymple Hamilton, who have not had him shown to them as an example of how they want you to be. There is another example I tend to give to try and explain this. At Annapolis, where they train both the officers for the US Navy and the US Marine Corps, usually together, they have a sergeant major wandering around. They always pick a sergeant major from the Marines who has a chest full of medals, who is literally the living embodiment of what it is to be a US Marine. And the point you have for having them around is not just the standards and the training they can impart, but to the junior officers training up, they have to think that they can give that person, someone like that, orders. And it's a visible reminder of this is who you have to command, this is who you have to lead. The senior officers chosen are chosen for a similar reason. Still to this day, Dartmouth is the same. When the Royal Navy picks the officers to be at Dartmouth, they are picking living examples they want those junior officers to grow up to be. When they pick academics, when they pick any of the staff at these institutions, they are picking people they want the Navy to grow up to be. That's pretty useful. And Dalrymple Hamilton was a very good example when we consider what happened in World War II. So why do you take a career destroyer officer who is known for his speed, his obsession with speed, his speed above all else, and put him in charge of your slowest frontline battleships?
And when I talk about frontline battleships, the R's, let's be honest, they are confined to convoy duty, their second line duties. Escorting convoys, fire support of amphibious assaults, those sort of things, that's what they're doing for. But Nelson and Rodney, they're the big 16-inch gun battleships. They are, to use that lovely phrase which Churchill has put around, the unsinkable bastions of the Royal Navy's battle line, which is complete not a twaddle, and conceiving of any ship as an unsinkable bastion is probably the most absurd thought process to ever go through of mankind, and it explains entirely the idea why they went with this design rather than going with the F3, which could have been adapted to a 28-knot fast battleship design. And what, even if they'd wanted the 16-inch guns over the 15-inch guns, you could have probably still worked it out with the 16-inch rather than 15-inch. You could have probably still got it to work in that form. Because let's be honest, the difference in weight between the 16-inch 45s and the 15-inch 50s is not so much. It really isn't that differential, that great. I mean, the 15-inch 50 is actually 30 inches longer in terms of its barrel length. And whilst, yes, the 16-inch 45 is going to be a 16-inch barrel, the differential in weight is not going to be, between the two is minuscule. So yeah, you could have probably got 16-inch 45s onto the F3 design and still got a fast battleship with 28 knots of speed. It wouldn't have had the same density of armour, though, as the Nelrod. That's the point. And they went for the density in terms of the most armour they could possibly put in it. But the Royal Navy then spends the next 20-odd years absolutely annoyed with themselves for it. Annoyed with them for it happening, annoyed with the politicians for it, annoyed with the naval officers, including Beatty, for doing it. It lumbered them with these ships which were beautiful, powerful, and always straining against their engines. So why do you take a speed demon and put him in charge? Well, this is a man who is known for pushing his engineers, pushing his chiefs, to get the most he can out of those engines. He's known for wrecking engines, for engines need to be replaced after he's been using them, for new boilers, all these things, but that doesn't matter. What matters is he finds the way to get the extra knots. He finds a way to get the extra speed. He finds a way to push them. Now, part of that you can do because, rather like certain rules in terms of operations of guns, and he breaks those with this ship as well, when he needs to, the Royal Navy, as all navies do, writes certain regulations and operating standards for peacetime. So you will operate the ship this way in peacetime because that will provide the longest life expectancy for the components, the best value for money. The best likelihood of that equipment being available. Then on top of that, you will over-maintain things. You will over-maintain them to the nth degree to keep them going. So they'll both over-maintain and will also try and restrict their operational characteristics in peacetime so you don't wear things out. One of the reasons of when you start asking people, which angles do you fire the guns at? No, we do not fire B turret over A turret. Okay, that means you can't fire B turret over A turret. No, that's not the reason. No, we don't do that in peacetime, because in peacetime, if we do that, we run a risk of doing damage to A turret because there are things which are sticking up, and if the overpressure of firing the guns runs a risk of damaging them. And we don't need to do that in peacetime. For doing gunnery practice, we can do gunnery practice pointing in that direction, away from A turret, and just as easily we can do it in that direction, straight across the bow. Yes, it's missing out some of the experience, but it's not going to cause any trouble in our actual operation when we're actually operating at sea. If we actually come for battle, if we haven't done it in that direction. It just means that those pieces of equipment are not going to be needed to replace as often. In wartime, the target's there, you fire over A turret, B turret will fire over A turret quite happily, do what it needs to do, and if the ship's damaged by that,
by the firing of its own guns, then you fix it afterwards. But can you imagine the headlines if that happens in peacetime? While exercising, the Royal Navy rounds up this huge bill because they blew their own mounts. Da, 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 da. You can imagine it. You can imagine all the newspapers. And we might like to think that's a modern thing, but it truly isn't. So yes, there are these rules, but then there's some people who sometimes read the rules and go, that means they couldn't do it. It's not that case. It's not the case at all. So, quite literally, he has been put in charge of this ship to get the best out of it. To get the most speed out of it. To push this ship to its nth degree. And he will do that. You have taken one of your fastest officers, and instead of putting him in charge of a fast battleship, a new King George V coming out, instead of putting him in charge of a battle cruiser or even a cruiser, which he can get, which automatically is going to reward him with speed, with more speed, you have given him one of the slower assets you have to try and build its speed up, because any knots he can get you, any knots are going to give you an advantage, are going to give you extra capability. And that's what he does. He will command her from November 1939 to July 1941. So he will command her from pretty much the beginning of World War One. The beginning of World War Two. Why do I say World War One? He will command her from the beginning of World War Two and take her all the way through to the point at which she goes in for a major refit in America. That's what he will do with her. Now, one of the things that always amazes me with Rodney, and this shows to me some of the Royal Navy's pursuit of speed, is that in August, as tensions are rising, Rodney develops steering problems, and so she proceeds to Rosyth for repairs and bottom cleaning. Now, these repairs, of course, take into account her steering, and they do spend a bit of time on the steering, but they're not able to find the reason for the problems. However, they do clean her bottom, and as we know, a clean hull can really help a vessel maximize its speed. The difference between a clean hull and a fouled hull can be a knot, even more, and especially when it comes to efficiency and fuel efficiency and its ability to do distance. So it's just amazing to me that in August, when they're worrying about tensions rising, Rodney develops unidentifiable and eventually unsolvable steering issues, which require to go for repairs in Rosyth, and specifically a bottom cleaning. Look, one of the things you realise as you go through naval history, and you go through history in general, you do get to start to be cynical. It's like, we will be talking today about, of course, the sinking of the Bismarck and the end of that. And there's going to be a scenario where I'm going to be talking about probably the Ark Royal's involvement in that and her strike. And what often comes up, people go, well, the torpedoes, the maglev, the magnetic torpedo warhead, not maglev, magnetic torpedo, detonators, they didn't work, so they changed them to contact detonators. Now, think about it from a perspective of the pilots going in. Now, yes, the magnetic detonators were probably something involved in it as well, but one of the troubles the Royal Navy has is they have done everything they can to make their torpedoes belly flop. They've got a tension wire, which no one else has because no one else is this obsessive, and they have fins, extended fins on it. They've worked on the buoyancy of everything on the torpedo. But for that all to work, you have to be proceeding at a perfect height above the water. Now, in Taranto, that's fairly easy. It's kind of flat. It's the Mediterranean and it's a harbour. These are going to mitigate against there being quite high waves. Most of the time. Mediterranean sometimes does decide to be very special, but that's special occasions. But and the reason I have this is because some nations even go for a box on their fin to, help them with their dynamics. Some don't. I'm talking about a Royal Navy torpedo, so it's not there for that. Now, when you're doing the attack in the North Atlantic, and remember, these pilots, whilst they've been doing strikes, they've been carrying operations from HMS Ark Royal, against the threats, the capabilities of Bismarck with its AA and everything else, in the weather they're experiencing, that's traumatic. And they still go in and do it. But they miss. They aim for Sheffield. They have all sorts of issues. And the torpedoes they drop, some of them go off as soon as they hit the water. Now, that's often put down to the magnetic detonator, and possibly it was part of it. But there's also the quite possibility that if you're not quite right at the right height, and you've got the big waves coming through, the bows entered the front of the torpedo, the bow has dipped into the water, has managed to smash into wave, or the tail has been, and these are going to upset it as it's going in. Now, yes, the magnetic detonator could be affected by that and could go off, but there's also, it can actually literally just damage the torpedo. These waves are big, dangerous things. The imbalancing can cause similar issues as when you have a torpedo go off underneath a ship's hull and cause its back to break. It can cause similar issues. Okay? Not exactly the same, but similar. That's me giving you an example. So, if I then turn around to the pilots and said, well, you know what, you guys did all that attack, I've got to send you in for another time. And it was probably partially your fault because some of you weren't at the right altitudes. So we've got to concentrate on that this time, but I'm going to arm you up exactly the same. What's their confidence going to be like? So instead you say, well, no, we're fitting all the torpedoes with contact detonators. We're going back to old school contact detonators. Not your fault. You go do this again. We've got full confidence in you. You were doing great things. We've put contact detonators on them. And so the history comes. It was the magnetic detonator's fault. And I said, probably, at least partially it was. But that wasn't the whole story. But you don't want to tell the pilots that at that time. But then it will get pushed through history and through the variations, because people afterwards won't necessarily think about that, because that stops a good narrative. That does stop a good narrative. To me, it's a better, more interesting narrative, but it's not an easy flowing narrative, because it means that there's no easy answer to a problem. It's not a case of there was this problem, they fixed it, everything went perfectly. There were a range of issues, and the thing was, one of them was that the issue they had to fix most pressingly when the pilots came back and they had to launch them again was morale. And so they did. Now, why is this coming? Why am I bringing this up and talking about Rodney? Because one of the interesting things you get with Rodney and Nelson is they seem to have to go in for hull cleaning quite often. They seem to have engine issues come up throughout the war. There are reasons for this. I would argue it's to try and keep them as high a speed as possible. So you're trying to keep the hull as clean as possible. But sometimes you need a reason to pull in, because the Royal Navy doesn't necessarily, just like when you're thinking about the morale, they want to give a very easy reason, that especially as they are controlling the German intelligence network, is being controlled by the British intelligence service in the UK. They want to put something out that can be, if it's picked up by any journalist in America who might publish it in their press, that can be easily disseminated through the intelligence network, that is going to provide a sensible, logical reason for why they're doing what they're doing. And yes, she might well have had unexplained steering issues. But were they bad enough that they required as frequent dry docking, repairing, and more importantly, bottom cleaning as she got? Well, it seems a bit much. And I cannot point to a document, I cannot point to a smoking gun that is going to back me up on this.
I can also not point to a smoking gun that is going to back me up on the switch to contact detonators on torpedoes. But I can point to lots of information around it. I can point to lots of evidence that comes in from it, and I can point to lots of discussions the Royal Navy has had over the years about how to manage personnel in terms of their duties and how to approach these things, and how officers had a history of dealing with these problems. The Royal Navy has a long history of its officers telling crew it's not their fault, it's the equipment, so we're going to change this piece of equipment and everything is going to be better. It's a long history. With that, let's get into the story of HMS Rodney and the history of what Dalrymple Hamilton gets up to with her prior to the Bismarck. But ultimately, 1939-1940 were good years for him as fleet commander. He had to put up with being the fleet flagship for a while instead of having a private ship, so he had an admiral and their staff aboard. Never fun. Especially if you've got a battleship. If you've got something which is a pure, ultimate ship energy capability, and suddenly you have an admiral aboard. So whilst you are technically captain of this most powerful vessel, you actually have someone aboard who you technically answer to. It's such a letdown. It is. It's a letdown. You got all this ship, and you have to go where you're basically a taxi driver for someone upstairs. Or downstairs, depending on the layout of the bridge structures. It's just so sad. It really is. The only advantage is that someday you too might be an admiral and you can do it to someone else. But what they spend most of their time doing is, wandering around the North Atlantic, the North Sea, wandering around the home waters, doing convoy duties, doing all sorts of various operations to try and keep an idea on what was going on and to be the response force. And often the notes made are, Rodney arrives surprisingly quickly. Rodney is being surprising in her attitude. She's often escorting convoys and sometimes even, as mentioned, but also sometimes even fast merchant vessels like ocean liners. She's escorting them. She does get, theoretically again, damaged. It's amazing. She gets damaged by strong gales in between the 6th of December 1940, and this caused apparently leaks in her hull plating and some flooding, which meant she was in repairs in Rosyth that went on. Well, the gales took place between the 6th and 8th of December, and she goes in on the 18th of December, is out on the 13th of January, so within 25 days she's out. And whilst doing these repairs, they also included some structural reinforcement of the hull plating, reinforcement of the forward hull structure, and various other needed things. Now, the thing I would say is, whilst yes, gales would cause that damage, one of the other things that's going to cause that damage is if the ship's being pushed constantly to the upper limits of what the hull profile speed can do. And she's nearly 20 years old at this point, I suppose. She nearly is. After all, she was launched in 1925, December 1925, and this is now January 1940. So she's 15, going on 16 years old. So actually not that old. And yeah, suddenly, I wonder what's been going on to cause trouble for the forward hull plating. And it's reinforced now. Reinforced. She was also, during 1940,
hit by a 1,000-pound German bomb, or 500-kilogram bomb, but it actually, how do I put this, decided to break up rather than properly blowing up. It's described as when a bomb sort of fizzles and doesn't really go off with full boom. When it hits the armoured corner of a 4.7-inch ready ammunition box on the upper deck, its fragments managed to penetrate the deck, and it managed to wound 3 men, and another 15 suffered electrical burns because, well, the water being used to fight a fire, which had been started by the fragments, poured into a junction box, and, well, yeah. But again, it's amazing how every time she has these issues, she comes back stronger. She is true testimony to whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and also testimony to the fact that they always seem to be ready to go with these plans of how to strengthen the ship when these events happen. I would say they're not necessarily intentional accidents, but I would say they have an ongoing plans going on in the naval constructors of, if this ship comes in, we can also do this, this, and this, if we can do it quickly. And it, again, by the way, every time one of these happens, her hull gets cleaned. The hull gets cleaned. It's one of the things that, and it's standard, of course, but her hull's getting cleaned. It's happening almost every 6 months, because if we consider that bomb hit, well, that happened in April, and she's repaired between April and May, and then, she's back again in December, so that's not quite 6 months, but when you go back, she was in there previously. Oh, when was she in there previously? Oh yeah, December again previously. December, January. Yeah, there seems to be going on here, but nothing certain happening. Look, I would say I am highly suspicious of at least 2 of those events in her career, in that whilst I think they probably did genuinely happen, the amount of other work done on the ship at the time, which had nothing to do with the supposed reason she was in there, makes me think that those were very useful occurrences. The recovering from the bombing, that's more serious, but no, that is a lot quicker. A lot quicker she's in and out. Again, still gets a hull cleaning. In 1941, Rodney gets to come close to some actual experience in January, because she's out when Scharnhorst and Gneisenau are out, and she comes across Gneisenau. She was escorting convoy HX-114, and she moved off from there. She was doing a lot more distant escort than an R-class battleship normally does. Normally an R-class battleship with a convoy would pretty much sit very close to the convoy and go, come at me. Rodney seemed to be more doing the, I'm circling the convoy, and come on if you want to try. I'm going to come looking for you. And, well, the story goes that, well, the history goes, Gneisenau was rescuing people from, taking prisoners basically, from a steamer that had stunk when Rodney comes over the horizon. Rodney was doing full chat. Gneisenau wasn't completely stopped, but it had all its boilers lit up and it was just low powering around. It gets up to speed as quickly as it can. And there is a debate over how fast Rodney was doing. But the thing is, we know Dalrymple Hamilton declines to fire at maximum range because he's worried about hitting the merchant ship. He declines to fire at maximum range because he's worried about hitting the merchant. And what happens is the Gneisenau starts cranking up speed to 31 knots. Now, the Germans don't view is they don't start increasing the distance between two ships until they are going greater than 26 knots. That's when they start noticing that the speed they're going far, they're actually increasing the distance. Up until that point, the distance had actually been reducing, and then stabilised, and then it starts increasing. So they estimated Rodney was doing 26 knots. We're not quite sure about that. All I can say is that, once again, after that, she comes in, and she has a nice little session with, various things to check things out, because she might have busted up her engines a bit. And then, of course, May 1941, that's when she gets the real fun. That's when, finally, Dalrymple Hamilton, after 30-odd years of waiting, finally gets to have the action he'd wanted. The big battle. He missed out on Jutland. He didn't miss out on this one. He didn't. Now, the saga of the pursuit of Bismarck, the sinking of Hood, the sinking of Bismarck herself, all these things, for Rodney starts with her escorting the Britannic, along with 4 Tribal-class destroyers from what had originally been 1st Tribal Flotilla, but which were now 6th Destroyer Flotilla. So whereas 2nd Flotilla had, which was the one in the Mediterranean, had become the 4th, the 1st Flotilla, which had been attached to Home Fleet, became the 6th. It makes sense. It does make sense. I'm just not sure quite to whom, but that's what happened. And he's escorted by Somali, which was the destroyer leader, of the flotilla leader, by Eskimo, Mashona, and Tartar. So 4 Tribal-class destroyers. That's quite a decent escort, and let's be honest, if Bismarck had got past Hood and Prince of Wales, been undetected and managed to get into the North Atlantic, well, if it had come across the Britannic, which was carrying a load of civilians across to Halifax, as well as some military passengers across to Halifax, and, well, they're mainly being carried on Rodney, and, then being stopped in her travel of bringing more troops back to Britain, that would have been a big thing. But let's be honest, if Bismarck and Prince Jurgen had run into Rodney and 4 Tribals, that's quite a force to fight a cover for Britannic to go to full speed and get out of there. But also, that's enough of a scary force that, frankly, I think Lutyens would probably have gone, I want to go elsewhere. This is not a scenario I want to go and fight, because I'm going to get damaged whatever happens. And that's the thing about being a surface raider, you don't want to get damaged. And that's the thing about the entire Battle of Denmark Straits. Yes, Hood is lost, and that is terrible, but you have a battle cruiser fighting a fast battleship and being restrained to operating with another fast battleship in a fast battleship manner, engaging a fast battleship. This is not a sensible scenario. We'll leave that to one side, though. The Battle of Denmark Strait is an entirely different discussion of exactly why they didn't follow Royal Navy doctrine, exactly what portion of Royal Navy doctrine they were following versus what they weren't following, and why they did what they did. And it is Monday night quarterbacking, to use the American expression, but also works the same for Britain. It's Monday night. It's basically how the teams perform on Sunday and Saturday. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about them at work at lunchtime on Monday and tell you what I would have done. But when you do have the scenario of them not going with actual doctrine, and then you do have a battle later on where the Royal Navy goes with its doctrine, it does open up for a discussion of why didn't they go with their doctrine. Anyway, so Battle of Denmark Strait happens on 24th of May. Now, Rodney and her little convoy had left on the 22nd of May, sailing for Halifax, but she gets the order with return. And what's really funny is first the order comes through, and it's basically go, Rodney, go off. And, well, Dalrymple Hamilton messages Somali and goes, can I take some of you with me? Britannic go to full speed, but can I take some of you with me? And Somali goes, yeah. The captain of Somali goes, woohoo, yeah. And then the order comes through going, make sure to bring some destroyers with you. And they're going, we've already left. They leave Eskimo with Britannic to escort her. Strict orders. Whatever happens, you buy Britannic time. And Eskimo going, well, probably along the lines of, we've sacrificed one bow for this war, what's another? And they literally will later, but leave that to one side. So she takes off Somali, Mashona, and Tartar. And Dalrymple Hamilton starts showing why he is a destroyer commander, but also it starts showing the legacy between him and then there's Creswell, who had set up the tribal class flotilla, second tribal class flotilla, and had come behind him in most of the flotilla commands when they'd be picking for similar staples for certain flotillas, because they developed sort of certain characteristics. And Philip Vian, who was now in charge of 4th Destroyer Flotilla, which was originally the 2nd Tribal Class Flotilla. And, well, like Philip Vian, Dalrymple Hamilton will go, right then, so we've lost contact with Bismarck. I'm going to have a discussion with his senior officers, and includes the American Naval Attaché who's aboard, because he's an experienced officer as well. And they decide that Bismarck's probably heading for Brest. And so they set course to head her off. And the American Naval Attaché reports that at some points along this trip, they are reaching 25 plus knots. 25 plus knots. Now, this did cause several mechanical issues. It does cause failures when they're doing this. By the way, those are similar failures which are reported that need to be repaired and adjusted after she's come back from the incident with Gneisenau. So it's as a case of, yes, you can exceed your speed. You can go faster than you're supposed to. But be prepared for wrecking your engines. And if you're prepared to wreck your engines, which Dalrymple Hamilton is, that's why the Royal Navy picks him. He's got form for doing it. It's not as if they don't know what they're dealing with. He's done it before. They've used him as an example for their junior officers to look up to. That's what he's doing. And then he hears later on 24th of May, on the 25th of May, actually, the day after, that from John Tovey, who's, he's got some intelligence reports, and it's a misinterpreted signal from reality, but he thinks, okay, we need to all head northwest because that's where the Bismarck is going to be. But Dalrymple Hamilton just goes, again, I'm too slow. I'll never get there in time. But if we keep going, then if the Bismarck gets past her, or if I'm right and they're wrong, then we'll be in position. So he keeps on. And then later on that same day, the Admiralty informs them that Bismarck was probably headed to Brest or something there, and they are now the best positioned to get in her way. And they're doing their best to get in her way. Remember, this is Rodney and 3 Tribal class destroyers. This is Somali, Mashona, and Tartar. This is not a force you want to engage with. And by the way, at the same point as we're talking about this, there's of course Philip Vian racing up the Atlantic from where he'd been hit with his destroyers of 4th Destroyer Flotilla, the tribals of them, and Pirun, the Polish destroyer, who had been escorting a convoy up the coast of Africa, left it with a C-class cruiser, rather like this force, and were charging up. There is a very real scenario when you look at the charts that if at 16-20 hours when they had come closest to Bismarck with just 25 nautical miles in between them, when you look at the charts, if Rodney had spotted her and started engaging and flashed off a signal saying she was engaging Bismarck with those 3 trials of her, the closest force that would respond to be coming up with the house system would be 4 more tribal class destroyers and Pirun. And I've looked into their charts, and there is a really interesting scenario where you end up with a fight going on between Rodney and the wounded Bismarck, 3 tribal class destroyers initially, and 4 more and a Polish destroyer coming in. And the whole thing is that a fight Bismarck walks away from? If Bismarck can go to speed, yes, she can pull herself away. She hasn't been hit by the torpedoes from Ark Royal yet, so she could theoretically pull away. But if she'd managed to get straddled and damaged, or got torpedoed by a tribal, and they carry ship-breaking torpedoes as well, there are options there. There are problems there. She can pull away from Rodney, but is she going fast enough to pull away quick enough? And can she pull away from the tribals? And again, the thing about Bismarck, as was shown by her eventual demise, is she can run really well. But if she gets caught and damaged, she hasn't got any support. Whereas Rodney and her escort do have support. It's a funny thing when you're looking at the chart maps and you're looking at the positions and you're working them out and you're going, so those tribals coming from there are best positioned to meet, because Tovey's taken his forces so far up that way that actually it's the tribals coming up. Ooh. But they don't see them. And at 2100 hours, Dalrymple Hamilton decides that he's going to head directly for Brest. Still making best possible speed. Now, this is a great phrase which Royal Navy officers use a lot. Best possible speed. They don't give you an exact knot figure for what their ship is doing. And best possible speed basically translates as, we are working our engineers to the bone. We have no idea what they're doing down there. We just know they are scraping every single inch of boiler they can to get every single knot, every single quarter of a knot, half a knot, tenth of a knot they can out of these engines and out of this hull. There is a great phrase which goes around by one officer of, if we have to, we'll tow the battleships back, but they will use the fuel they need to hunt this ship. That's how committed the Royal Navy is to hunting Bismarck. And by the way, it's when the Soviets are compiling a list post-war of the German surface raiders and looking at how much forces they attract and how much forces they keep off position on terms of the British and the British forces in World War II. That's when they get the idea of what they do with the Svolov class and their doctrine for them. And it's one of the reasons why they maintain an Indian Ocean force. Literally to draw away Allied forces. Because it works so well. It worked so well. Anyway. Ark Royal launches an attack. Famously, she launches 14 Swordfish torpedo bombers. First attack is launched on Sheffield by mistake. They make a mistake. And let's be honest, Royal Navy cruisers are designed to look like battleships. That's part of their design structure to confuse the enemy. So it makes their aerial reconnaissance and intelligence task as difficult as possible. So it worked. Sheffield probably would have preferred it not have worked so well. And that's when 6 of the 11 torpedoes which were dropped ran, and she managed to cone them. But 5 detonated when they hit the sea at various points. Now, let's put it this way. In terms of detonation, there were about 2 confirmed detonations, and the other 3 looked like they broke up. They didn't seem to be detonations, which is why I talk about the difference in the scenario. When you're looking at the actual detonations and the information that comes in, the confirmation and analysis reports afterwards, not all seem to have detonated. But you've just had that problem of them targeting the wrong ship, and their torpedoes didn't work, and now you're sending them out again. At dusk, which is going to be one of the most difficult times to target. Because dusk and dawn are some of the most difficult times visually for your eyes to really calibrate to the world around you. So yeah, morale matters. Morale of the crew matters. So yes, the analysis is made that it was all the magnetic detonators' fault. Were fitting contact detonators to all these torpedoes, and they managed to hit Bismarck with 3 torpedoes. They managed to hit her with 3. 2 of them strike forward of the after gun turrets, and really the core of the torpedo fences, and they are described as causing no significant damage, which is code for they cause problems, but nothing that we couldn't deal with. Damage control can manage it. The last strikes further aft. It hits the stern. Please note, these torpedoes were all probably targeted on the front of the ship, and of course with its movement, they hit the stern. They hit aft. Disabled the battleship's steering. Well, Bismarck lost her steering. That's not good. And this causes her to reduce speed significantly. One of the interesting things is that Rodney, at one point when she suffers steering damage, returns home using her engines to steer. Using shafts. In fact, that had happened within the initial point of Dalrymple Hamilton getting control of Rodney. You know, as said, when she had her serious problems with her rudder in November 1939, which led her to doing her lovely repairs until sort of between November and December 1939, when she gets steering, she steers home with her engines, and you know, she has her hull cleaned and all sorts of things happen. It's a lovely time. Well, for Bismarck, that was slightly more difficult to do, because to do that with Bismarck's design, you have to pretty much fetter the central screw, the central shaft. So you're immediately cutting off about roughly a third of your power. And then if you're trying to steer, it causes other issues. So you're cutting your speed significantly. You're cutting the power you can put in the water, and you're cutting how you can balance things. And despite that phrase of no significant damage, there'd still been shock damage. And shafts and things all rest on bearings which are not always the best at sustaining shock damage. They feel the impact, they feel it, they're very needy. Shafts are always... They are both some of the strongest thing, and it's often the strongest components, even stronger than gun barrels, on a ship. But they're also some of the most sensitive. And you can look through the history of World War II and World War I and look at the number of issues which ships suffer due to shock damage to their shafts. It makes you wonder all the more why nations haven't yet moved modern warships onto pod propulsion. But that's probably due to their damage control methodologies and how they're going to adapt it. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the difficulty of dry docking and damage repair, and their worries about that with pod propulsion, but surely there are ways around it. Surely there's nothing that you cannot overcome if you apply your thoughts to it. But with this all in place, Bismarck is slowed down. Bismarck is having trouble steering. And so Tovey now feels in a position to order Rodney to actually join up with King George V for the battle against Bismarck. And this is sensible because Mashona and Somali, 2 of their escorting destroyers, 2 of those lovely tribals that escort them, have to go home because they're running out of fuel. Don't worry though, Bismarck isn't getting a night off just because they're holding back, because 4th Destroyer Flotilla, that is Dalrymple's old unit, now under the command of Philavian, come dashing in with Pirwin and go, don't worry, we'll Keep her busy. And that's when Bismarck ends up experiencing the box formation. All night long. All night long. She gets the joy of the box formation. And then the following morning, well, Rodney spots Bismarck at 08:44 hours. This is the 27th of May. King George V had spotted her at 08:43 hours. But Rodney's the first to open fire. At roughly 23,400 yards, or 21.4 kilometers. She opens fire at 08:47 hours. Bismarck responds by 08:49 hours. Now, one of the things you have coming up here is the fact the rate of fire being used, because we often talk about ships operating at their maximum rate of fire when they're really pumping out the shells, going for every click as possible as they can do. But when you're doing ranging salvos, you're going to fire, wait for that salvo to hit, correct your targeting, and then fire. That whole information gathering process can take minutes, especially the distance you're dealing with. So the rate of fire isn't really the same in initial fighting point. And at this point, it's her third salvo straddles the Bismarck, and she hits her with 2 shells on the 4th salvo, which is at 09:02 hours. So, in that regards, you then realise that in the space of, well, depending on whether you start from 08:44 hours, when she first spots her, to 09:02, which is 18 minutes, which is how I usually do it, she fires 4 salvos, which is a salvo roughly every 4.5 minutes on average, is what you're talking about. But if you take it down 3 minutes, you get 4 salvos in 15 minutes, because you're starting with us firing at 08:47 hours. And, well, that's still, what, 3 points every salvo, every 3.625 minutes. Yeah. Well, no, is it? Yeah, 625 minutes, 3.625 minutes. It's still nowhere near her maximum rate of fire. It's nowhere near her maximum rate of fire. These first 2 shots showed the quality of the gunnery drill that Dalrymple Hamilton has been doing since the issue with Gneisenau, where he wasn't sure about doing long-distance range firing because he was worried he'd hit the merchant ship. So since then, he's been obsessed with getting his ship's gunnery practice up to the point at which it could pluck hairs off fleas. In fact, him and Admiral Lee would probably have had a very good conversation where he would have basically sat there going, "Tell me everything you know. I want to improve my gunnery to the best." Because Dalrymple Hamilton was a good all-round destroyer officer, but you have to remember, this is his first battleship command. Okay? He's been to gunnery school, he's been to torpedo school, he's been to all these things. But he hasn't been that. He's been a destroyerman. And he's now dealing with very long-range engagement. He's relying on the quality of his gunnery officer. Now, the thing is, those 2 hits with that 4 salvo, they knock out the forward superfiring turret, that's B turret, on Bismarck. They disable A turret, and damage the bridge, killing a lot of people up there, it seems. Bismarck scores no hits. Now, Bismarck has spent the night with her people being tormented by destroyers, has been attacked by aircraft the day before, has been constantly at action stations, has already been dealing with battle damage. Her crew are worn out. In simple terms, the psychology of the box formation has done its job. Those crews, they're worn out. Those gunnery crews, those personnel, they're all worn out. Mentally already. And so, yeah, they're having difficulty firing back. That's the entire. That shows the Royal Navy doctrine working. That was the Royal Navy's doctrine: how to destroy an enemy battleship. It's brutal, but it's effective. It's when they don't follow it that's the trouble. And in this scenario, they are following it to the T. The destroyers have been harassing through the night. Now, Bismarck is dealing with fire from Rodney, King George V, as well as HMS Norfolk and HMS Dorsetshire, 2 county-class cruisers. There is no holding off fire. There is no, oh, well, we want to make sure the capital ships can know their shell engagement easily. There is no, we want to, not have you engaging from one side. There's no, at this point, there's only one enemy ship, and she's damaged. You could accept them holding it off. But no, Toby's going with the doctrine. We all pile in. We have a numerical advantage. Use it! Our taxpayers have paid a lot of money for us to have this advantage. They do not expect us to throw it away for silly reasons. No matter how logical or how thought out you might have that goes against doctrine, doctrine is you have the mass, use it. Use it. And, well, they just keep getting closer. Rodney, as you can see in this picture, is by far the closest to Bismarck. In fact, they're definitely the closest to Bismarck in the battle. As the salvos keep going in, as she keeps firing, every time she's given a chance, she breaks closer to Bismarck. She is using destroyer rules, and there's a reason why this happens. Because when Dalrymple Hamilton gets the range down to roughly 3,000 yards, she fires her torpedoes. Bismarck managed to straddle her. But Rodney still gets closer, and they don't do enough damage. They're causing splinter damage, but it's not causing enough trouble. She managed to actually, with the range by 09:31 hours, that's what? 47 minutes into the engagement. She's close enough that when she fires her gun, she blows off the left barrel of Bismarck's lower aft gun, starting a fire inside the turret, forcing its evacuation. It's about this point that Bismarck's main guns go completely offline. And as Rodney gets to point-blank range, that's 3,000 yards, she's firing at a flat trajectory, pretty much. And at this point, there are some great quotes which come through. One of those is from Ludovic Kennedy, watching torpedoes going in, said, if true, this is the only incident in history of a battleship of torpedoing another one in action. But also, from many eyewitnesses, at this point, Rodney's own guns were causing more damage to her with their firing and the damage they were causing over the decks, because it was such a flat trajectory, than Bismarck was. And again, Dalrymple Hamilton doesn't care. He's driving closer. He is literally pummeling this ship to death. She fires 378 16-inch shells, 706 6-inch shells during the battle. They cease fire at 10:16 hours, which is, well, after an hour and 32 minutes. An hour and 32 minutes. She lost one of the guns in A turret because it broke down, and 2 others in B turret were disabled temporarily, but were got back going in the fight. So by the end, she's engaging with 8 guns, but at one point she was down to 6 guns.
And this is why you have multiple guns. And that was all caused mostly by the shock damage of her own guns firing at such low elevation. Yes, the Royal Navy has a doctrine of battleships closing to decisive range. Yes, they have the long-range fire to disable enemy fire control, then you close and you engage at decisive range to sink the enemy. Decisive range was supposed to be about 18,000 yards. Not 3,000 yards or less. Not 3,000 yards or less. They did well. They did well. After this, she returns home to the UK for fuel to be replenished and fixed up a bit. And then on the 4th of June, she escorts Windsor Castle with 4 destroyers again. Windsor Castle is another ocean liner. To Halifax. And then takes herself off to the Boston Navy Yard to have her propulsion machinery and other things repaired. Including a lot of self-inflicted damage from the battle. And that's also the time period when the Americans learned that water can be armor. Dalrymple Hamilton gets her out there, but then he goes off to his next post. And that's being made a Rear Admiral. Now, being Flag Officer Iceland as your first appointment as a flag officer is a pretty cool position. It allows him to oversee what's going on. He's running mainly a destroyer force, watching what's going on, the escorts and etc. things going out. And for someone who'd taken part in the convoys in World War I and been running destroyers then and doing those operations, he must have found it not so much restful, but a return to normalcy. He does a good job in Iceland. They seem to respect him and get along with him and realise what he's there for, and he goes out of his way to make sure everything is done in a manner which is not going to cause trouble with the Icelandic people. He's very careful about that. He's a good officer, and he worries about his personnel. He doesn't really like it though, and he doesn't really like his next appointment, because the next appointment is Naval Secretary. But he does that for quite a while now, and that's Naval Secretary to the First Lord of the Admiralty. And whilst that has a myriad of duties, its biggest one, and its most important one, is advising on promotions of admirals and selection of admirals for posts. Again, it's another role which has a huge responsibility for the culture of the Navy. It's hugely responsible for the culture of the Navy. We've talked about Dartmouth, but Naval Secretary for 2 years, and these are critical. This is a critical period. Well, it's not quite 2 years, 18 months sort of thing. August 1942 to March 1944. That's a critical period of a lot of promotions of officers going on. A lot of key positions have to be picked. And it's Dalrymple Hamilton who's advising the First Lord of the Admiralty, advising the Sea Lords on who would be best picked to be positioned. He's the one keeping track of what all the admirals are doing, which one's available, what skills they've got, what's their mental state, what's their health, who can be pushed, who can't be pushed, what's the best decision to try and make. And this is important, remember, because combat experience and all these things are going to add up to being the first Sea Lords and the second Sea Lords and the third Sea Lords post-World War II. This is going to make a statement for the fleet. This is going to guide the Navy. This is going to set the traditions for the next 300 years. It's an interesting thing that Dalrymple Hamilton, who is very early on not tasked with becoming, he's obviously not on a Sea Lord track, is still very obviously tasked by the Royal Navy with permeating a culture which they wish to see for their junior officers, and selecting the culture, or rather the attributes, of they want for their senior officers. it's kind of like you have someone in this organization who he's not destined to be the leader of the organization in terms of its organizational leader, its head. But he's been selected early on as a cultural leader of the organization. As someone who is going to think of the organization, who's going to want the best for the organization, and is going to promote the best attributes of the organization as the organization feels it. His leadership style, his approach to his personnel, how he gets everything he can out of his ships and crew, in ways that leave those crew incredibly loyal to him. And whilst the ships are dinged up and needing a refit on their engines, they have achieved their missions and got home in one piece. That's something to think about. And I would argue that, in some regards, the legacy of Dalrymple Hamilton, those who formed him, and how the legacy was built in that period by the Navy, has continued on a lot for today in the modern Royal Navy. The can-do attitude, which the Royal Navy likes to thrive itself on today, talk about, is something which really comes from the destroyermen of the 1920s and 30s. It really does come from the destroyermen in that phraseology. I would argue the Royal Navy's always had that sort of mentality, but especially the what I would call objective-based instructions and objective-based orders, rather than giving someone detailed list of, you will do this by doing this, this, this. You tell them, I want you to achieve this, go do it. You know the rules of what you can and can't do. Go. You know the framework of how this ship works. You know what we have available. Go do it. Or rather, this is what I want you to do. These are the resources you have. Go frigate it out. Sort of system, again, comes from that destroyer group, that background, because they're small enough ships that they don't have enough people to be constantly watching everyone. And you have to be able to rely on the people to go and think for themselves. And it's the same with the can-do attitude. Yeah, we aren't a big ship. How are we going to fix this problem? How are we going to take this on? And Dalrymple Hamilton is key. He instituted that at a junior officer level at Dartmouth, and then as a senior officer, he is selecting officers involved. And of course there's going to be some bias involved. There is also personally going to be some selection of officers who remind him of him, personality-wise. And that's the thing about the Royal Navy. They've always the successful factions, and I've talked about the factions of the Royal Navy before. And Dalrymple Hamilton is from a faction within the Royal Navy. It's a very old faction, which I've talked about on this channel before, actually, as well. But I'll let you figure out, as a bonus question, what faction that is. What ongoing tree of naval officers that is from. And it's still an ongoing one. It's still going today in the Royal Navy. They hold the naval culture in the highest regard, and that's a very important thing of them. You can officers who talk about the culture of Navy, who want to maintain the culture of Navy of how it works, how it adapts, how it evolves. That faction is always very heavy on the culture. Gives you a bit of a clue. That's all pushed through by them. That's all pushed through by that generation of naval officers. And that leads us to his next mission. Okay, he's finally back on a cruiser. He hasn't been on one of those in years. Years. He's been avoiding anything bigger than a destroyer for most of his career by this point. And he's given HMS Belfast as his flagship. He gets 10th Cruiser Squadron. He gets to serve on it between March 1944 and April 1945. He's promoted to Vice Admiral during this position, so he starts off as Rear Admiral commanding 10th Cruiser Squadron, then becomes Vice Admiral commanding 10th Cruiser Squadron, which is nice. It's a good command for him to have. He's a good positioner for this. He is going to be a very decent cruiser commander. Not necessarily a great strategist, but he's going to be someone who is going to be a good operational and tactical thinker. He's a bit annoyed. He arrives a little bit too late to get involved in the scrap with Scharnhorst. If he had been there, he would have no doubt enjoyed the fact that he was involved in the two of the great battleship on battleship fights of World War II. I'm fairly sure if he'd known what was going on in enough detail when Denmark Straits was going on, I would have not have been surprised if Rodney would have managed to turn up somehow. If you consider where Rodney was and what her operations were, where she was going across the Atlantic, and where Denmark Straits and where the battle takes place, it's a little difficult to imagine her getting there. But she does have 2 days at sea, and 4 destroyers and Britannic with her. And if she'd been busting it at 25 knots, plus, well, who knows? Who knows? And that then ends up with a very interesting Battle of Denmark Strait, because again, you have the scenario of, oh, Hood's been lost, Prince of Wales going south. What the frigate is that? Oh, hello, it's Rodney to go. Hello, you're chasing Prince of Wales. But it didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen was because the mission they were doing was important enough, they were going on that route, and no one was passing on the information to Dalrymple Hamilton till they needed them. And the moment they needed it, he'd responded. And now, as part of this cruiser squadron, that's what he does again. He takes part in the bombardment of Normandy. He takes part in all sorts of operations with those cruisers in that period. And he does a very good job of it. He earns great praise because, when he has his 4-inch guns in, he believes bombardment means use every gun you have, and he has his 4-inch guns targeting targets with the 6-inch guns when they don't have any other targets. When they have targets for the 4-inch guns, he'll have the 4-inch guns firing at them, and the 6-inch guns firing at the prepared targets. And when he returns from firing to reload, well, they do actually debate replacing the barrels because they think they've worn through enough of them, and including some of the 4-inch barrels. They don't. They take because he wants to get out to sea as quickly as possible. They have fun with a Schnellboat, but it doesn't cause much better trouble. They raise the anchor, get behind a smoke screen, start engaging as best they can, and leave their other vessels to do the damage that they need to do with it. The Germans tried to get Schnellboats in a few times. The most serious incident involves Ile-de-Bass, an attempt to destroy a flotilla, but they do try a few other times as well. And after that, well, he gets to go off and use his experience from when he'd been looking after the reserve flotilla in Nor to good effect running the dockyard in Malta. Making sure the ships refitting to go out to the Far East are being refitted properly, working out the dockyard, getting that cleared up and operating that as clear as possible, having a good look at the wrecks, overseeing the ships in there to see if they can be floated out, if they can be salvaged or can be used, or if they can't, and what's going on with them. And generally just helping to get the Royal Navy ready for the next portion of war and the much worried about potential ongoing war, potential war with the Soviets, because the Royal Navy was thinking it was a possibility. There were issues, there were enough tensions already, there was worry about it. So yeah, they're working on all these things. And it's a nice place to go. It is a nice place to go. But it's not home. Home for him was Ayrshire. Home for him was Scotland. And he was very lucky because somehow, and I don't know why, the Royal Navy decided that he should become Flag Officer commanding Scotland, Northern Ireland and the waters therein. For a officer of Scottish descent, this was a truly beautiful posting. And it ends up, he does this July 1946 to July 1948. Then he gets posted to Washington for a couple of years and gets to retire in October 1950. He's promoted to an admiral in January 1948. And this is just a lovely time for him. He's dealing with the demobilizing Royal Navy, but also helping the Royal Navy plan for the future, to potential roles. He gets to go out to Washington and basically talk on even terms with his counterparts out there. After all, he's the guy who they have reports of what he'd got Rodney to do, and they have reports about what Rodney's engines were like when he came home. They have respect for him. Dalrymple Hamilton is one of those officers they do respect. And then he retires. I always finish these videos with a question, and this is not going to be without one again. But I want you to think about this. I've talked a lot about the destroyermen. How, when you look at the senior officers, and I'm talking about the senior officers as a whole, thanks to their early command experience, thanks to their early force command experience in running flotillas, you find a great preponderance of destroyer officers ending up as senior admirals during, just before, during, and after World War II. They really are the dominant faction. I know people like to talk about battleship admirals and this and that, but it's destroyer admirals. It's destroyermen who are getting up to the top, who are the senior ones. And especially the Royal Navy and US Navy, but other navies as well. I'd like you to think about what the legacy they've left in terms of leadership from those ships in modern fleets. What can you see their legacy as being? Because these are men who grew up on the destroyers prior to World War I, which were a few hundred tons, and then ended World War I on ships which were a couple of thousand tons. And by World War II were in various senior posts. Think about how the world changed for them. The example I tend to give with Dalrymple Hamilton is the last destroyer he walked on while he was still in service was a Daring class destroyer, which was nearly 5 times the mass and size of the first destroyers he'd served on in his career. In the span of one man's career, the destroyer had quintupled in size. Think about the effect that has on your leadership. You've gone from leading a crew of 70 to a crew of 300 on a destroyer. How do you keep the same morale, the same culture? How do you keep the same attitudes with such a dramatic change in structure, in size and form? And yet they managed to. And that is a skill. That is a leadership attribute. And what's the legacy of that today? That's what I'm asking today. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know this is slightly longer. I usually aim for these to be roughly 90 minutes. But this is going to be a little over 2 hours. But I think he deserved it. I do think he deserved it. What coming up? Well, this one will come out after James Somerville's, but before the Battle of Zoncino. That's going to be a fun one. The Battle of Zoncino is fun. Take care, have fun, and hope you enjoyed. If you like the videos, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow, and really does make things better. Thank you. Take care, and have fun.